Thank you, Dan. There's a question. Thank you for your beautiful teaching and generous encouragement. Can you say something about what is good to do when wanting to fully engage Henry's original love teachings and other practices? Like over recent months, it's been the Brahma Viharas, whilst also engaging koan practice, even though I do forget so often. I get it's not 3, and I do not get this. Lovely. Suddenly thinking of Rubin's essay on Mu in the book of Mu that we touched on yesterday, and his interpretation of this, living with Mu, sort of the living practice of Mu, of course, on the cushion, just letting it ride every exhale, and then off the cushion, just absorption, pouring yourself into whatever is at hand, whatever it is you're doing. And, that resonates with students who want to do, which I have been doing and really appreciating Henry's original love series and teachings. Just that, as I live with Mu and still sit with Mu, of course, and walk, it just comes up. But the way of expressing that when doing this original love is to be fully absorbed in the beautiful guidance, in these exploring these 4 zones of mindfulness, support, samadhi, different forms of samadhi, and awakening. I've had a couple of students who are, either deep into Mu or into, the koan curriculum ask, well, is it okay if I do this? And of course. And, I can't imagine a sense of conflict there, but I do think that we, you can navigate it yourself. When I'm sitting myself, unless I'm being guided in these practices, and as for example, Henry is guiding us, and I'm really learning different mindfulness practices, not having grown up in that. But in my own sitting, it's I find I'm really sitting in Mu. I've also noticed that if sitting gets distracted, I sometimes find it helpful to sort of, take hold of one of those other lifelines of practice. Maybe in a provisional way for me, and it'll kind of, settle back, and then here comes Mu. But I think it's worth exploring, and nothing to resist. Mu is so large, and at the same time so small. Also, these Brahma Viharas are often known as the 4 immeasurables. That's how we've been hearing about them for so long in KZC. Ruben's got a number of talks over the years, and I recently heard one by Gil Fronstel on the Brahma Viharas that really enjoyed, just free podcast. Basically, loving kindness, compassion, empathetic joy, and equanimity. Sometimes you hear them in a slightly different order, but this, metta, compassion, as we hear the Pali or Sanskrit karuna, the empathetic joy, mudita, the equanimity, upekkha. I know that because of this chant that we've done so many times in session that comes around in the end to the Sanskrit. This question came in a little earlier, and I was just sort of sitting with it. And what struck me is how these four immeasurables can sort of line up with those four zones, or at least resonate with them. And it was just kind of a delight. There are all these connections and resonances, and in the end, it is all so fluid and transparent. So I guess, within one's own practice, if you're taking in these different practices, or, perhaps deeply oriented in one and now taking a koan study, let your practice be your guide. It's, if the resonances seem to kind of melt together and delight and, just flow into this one stream, fine. And if you start to feel confused or conflict, and koan study is really primary right now, I would stay, just come back to that home base, which, nothing is being abandoned or lost. It's all present in Mo. Amazingly so. All this loving kindness, compassion, empathetic joy, equanimity. This question made me go look at our chant, which is so beautiful. It's called Sublime Attitudes, and most of you may know this. Out of this loving kindness practice, this tradition, it begins with, may we be happy, may we be free from suffering and pain, may we be free from ill will, and so on. And then it goes into the metta, may all living beings be happy. May all living beings be free from ill will. May all living beings be free from oppression. May all living beings be free from trouble. May all living beings look after themselves with ease. That is this outpouring of Mu. Your mooing, Mu itself, all of the pain of the world mooing, all of this abundance, this inexhaustible well, just may all living beings be freed from all suffering and pain. This is the move toward, the second immeasurable, this compassion. May all living beings enjoy good fortune. This, mudita, sort of appreciation or empathetic joy. And this is the one that I just suddenly felt, well, that resonates with support, that zone that's Henry is talking about. And then finally, the equanimity in this chant. All living beings are the owners of their actions, heir to their actions, born of their actions, related through their actions, and live dependent on their actions. Whatever they do, for good or for evil, to that will they fall heir. May all living beings live happily, always free from ill will. May all share in the blessings springing from the good all have done. Equanimity and, this one existence. This is Mu. This boundlessness, this, nothing to compare, no way to divide it. I've heard sometimes teachings, sort of warning that some of these practices, and perhaps more esoteric, this is rather far away traditions, but this can be harmful. And there may be instances where certain, meditation may not be appropriate for someone at a certain time in their life. Mu cannot be used for ill. It can't be divided. Somebody emailed me yesterday, end of day, asking if Mu is love. It wasn't as though to answer the question, what is Mu? It was just, is there any difference? And, my sense, well, there's this original love, this love with no opposite, love that cannot be divided, that has no border, that includes everything. Everything. So I would let that be the guide, and then trust your practice. It's all exploration. It's all about discovery. We hear so much about this world that Shakyamuni Buddha discovered, this great discovery. It's not that it wasn't always there, whatever. Our sense of time is so crazy, but it didn't just suddenly. I doubt that he was the first. But because of that great discovery, this is all coming down to us. And that's the invitation in our practice. Discovery of what this is. We're soaking in it. And yet it's so vast, this infinite horizon, always more to discover. So I appreciate that. I get that it's not three. And yet, that also reminds me of this, total oneness, and yet each thing distinct. And whatever you pick up, that's all of it. So perhaps a lot of cross-pollination here, and no fear. I think that the question alone suggests there's nothing, that the person asking this has discernment. This next question seems slightly related to me. As I have some spacious time coming up over a few weeks, I was wondering about reading a book about the koan I am with. Is it better just to be with the koan and not read? What do you suggest? I think I am asking about the place of reading and engaging this way. Yeah. So this too, I think, is up to personal discernment. What I would not recommend if one is doing this koan curriculum, so having had an experience that has launched you into miscellaneous koans, and then the Mumonkan Gateless Gate and the Blue Cliff Record, Hekigan Roku and the Shoyoroku, Book of Equanimity, and so on. There are many teishos available on these koans, and there are many wonderful teachings, commentaries. I recommend when you're in the koans, first sitting with the koan. Really in that true blindness, bringing it into your sitting. Or mooing in your sitting with the koan sort of hanging on a hook on the wall in the room. And it may just fall on you. And then read about it, by all means. Mostly I think it's not harmful to read alongside sitting with a koan. But what it can do is engage our discursive mind. And so it can actually kind of be a distraction, derailing. On the other hand, I would make a caveat if one is sitting with mu. And what just comes up so strongly is the place that reading had in Yamada Kon Roshi's experience, that it's recorded in the Three Pillars of Zen and often cited. It's so beautiful and strong, deep. And that was triggered by reading. Riding home from work on the train, reading and coming across a line that he had read, probably heard many times, but somehow in that moment, it suddenly struck him. Reading this, I came to realize clearly that mind is no other than mountains, rivers, the great wide earth, the sun, the moon, and the stars. And it just went into him. And he's on the train and he starts to kind of get teary-eyed, and he's dabbing at his eyes, and his wife is kind of encouraging him to get hold of himself, and he does. And they walk back home and have dinner. He probably sits, they go to bed, and in the night he wakes up, and suddenly this line is right there. That's it. So I think reading can be very stimulating and enriching, and just as long as it's not a substitute for practice. I read whenever I can, and sometimes even I've had periods where I've read an essay like Dogen's Fukan Zazimbi, uh, universal instructions, recommendations on Zazen. For months, I read that essay every time before I sat. And it didn't, something about that didn't kind of charge up the discursive mind. I just read it and in that space sat. Um, so about Mu, there's some beautiful things written about Mu, and there is no harm. I mean, this is not an equation or a riddle. There's no solution. It's a discovery. And you might read something that like Yamada Kon Roshi somehow just strikes you. And then you take that into your sitting, but it's just, and you can come to that as only you can. If I, in this case, I would say, try it out, reading with this precious time, this spacious time, and see how it feels. There is a lot to read, and much of it really good. Oh, lots of questions suddenly. Sometimes I feel like I'm not sure what I'm following when I'm following the breath, but I'm following it, and this feels okay. Do you have advice here? Not sure what I'm following the breath. It's kind of a wonderful open question. Yeah, what is the breath really? It's an anchor. It's breathing us. We may begin by following it in the sense of noticing it entering the body. It's so helpful to concentration. A lot of people say, well, find that spot where you most notice your breath and let that be a place where you rest your attention. So it's this great concentration, or counting the breath. Where the beauty of that is that the count and the breath just, are you following the count? Are you following the breath? It's just this one. And then, following the breath, like you're here and this breath. There's no end to it. So if you feel uncertain, though, I would suggest, just experiment with maybe noticing how the breath enters your nostril, how it goes from cool to warm, what that sensation is. Or for some people, they really feel it in the heart, or maybe even deep down what's called the hara. But just naturally, I wouldn't force it. Oh, the rise and fall, the lungs, this wonderful fluidity, and at the same time anchored. Basic advice, if there's any distraction or concern, is to go back to counting. I think I've told this before, but there was, quickly tell it. Years and years ago, Ruben was asked to offer an Intro to Zen weekend for a group of 60 graduating high school girls. This was in Japan. and their teacher was giving them this as a graduation present. And they had, it was total introduction, Friday night to Sunday afternoon, of course, talks, instruction, and lots of sitting. And they were taught to count the breath from the start. That was the practice throughout. They may have begun counting the inhale on 1 and the exhale on 2. And then over the course of the weekend, gone to just counting the exhale, up to 10, back to 1. If you lose count, back to 1. Wonderful practice. Nothing to judge, just the moment. It's just the moment you've lost count, you come back. Thich Nhat Hanh says, come back with a little smile. So at the end, these graduating seniors turned around in a big circle and were invited to say, well, what was that like for you? And some said, oh, my knees hurt, my back hurt, my head hurt, my brain hurt, my mind hurt. And some said, well, that was interesting. I'm curious. I may pursue this, may give this a try. And there was one young woman there who said, well, for just one moment, there was nothing but 3. I think I'll learn this practice. So that might be a pointer for what it is to rest in the breath. Could you please say something about listening to music while immersed in mu and immersing in music? Is mu listening? Is mu the music? Or is music just a distraction? Wow. Listening to music, what a great joy. I wouldn't recommend it while sitting, but very, very conducive. This practice and music go together so well. Is mu listening? Yeah. Is mu the music? I just I remember suddenly a talk that Ryan Roshi gave where he said, in the beginning, people may say, mu is music, mu is the light on the wall, mu is the sound of the fan. But that's not enough. That's not really it. The music is mooing. The light on the wall is mooing. The fan is mooing. He felt that was more precise. Mu is in and through it. I would say there's no need to overlay an idea of mu on that experience. Just pour yourself into it. Rest in it. That lively rest. There's so much written about music, and I've been reading. I mentioned Ross Boliter, this wonderful Australian teacher who wrote this book on Tozan's 5 ranks. And he himself is a musician and composer of music for ruined pianos. And of course, he's talking about the nature of sound and silence. And this, deafening silence in the sound. One of his teachers is John Cage, who famously wrote this piece of music that's 4 minutes and 30 some seconds of silence. It's extraordinary to go to a performance of it. The performer comes out, bows, sits down at the piano, starts the timer, and sits for 4 minutes and these seconds. And of course, it's just this alive silence. And somebody coughs. And there's just all these little sounds. A shift of a body, or you hear a door close. I mean, if it's a good hall, you're not going to hear the traffic or the airplanes. But even within that, carefully enclosed sound space, there's all this minute and nuanced activity. And yet it's just silence. And it's the most alive piece of music. So I recommend, John Cage has done some writing, and he's got a couple podcasts, old ones. He was a Zen practitioner, of course, that came into it. And so he's really informs his understanding of sound and music. I can't imagine how music would be a distraction unless you're using it in that way, to sort of take you away from something that you're doing. And then be fully distracted, plunge into that. Wonderful. Can't fall out of this, actually. We seem to be always told to exhale mu, but what about inhaling mu? Why would there be any difference? Sorry if this is a silly question. I seem to have snagged on it. Also, perhaps some brief advice on the eyes, open or shut, focused or unfocused. Yeah, so the basic instruction is just to empty everything on the exhale. But when I get into this, sometimes I'm inhaling mu, I'm exhaling mu. I went through a period of practicing with this koan that's in the Book of Equanimity, the Shuguroku, that is the other version of mu, where a monk asks Joshu, does a dog have Buddha nature or not? And Joshu answers, ooh, it does. And then the koan goes on, this exchange, and then the second part of it is, does a dog have Buddha nature or not? Moo, or woo, he would have said, but moo, doesn't. No, not having, it doesn't matter what that means, but, and there's a little that goes on there, but so just sitting with that koan, and I still, to this day, sometimes I'll just fall into this inhaling, ooh, exhaling, moo. I think moo on the in and the out would be just fine. You're soaking in it. It's breathing, it's mooing. I would just, you don't have to make yourself do it. If that's naturally happening, explore it. And if you start to try to decide while sitting what to do, just go to moo on the exhale. That's the risk with all of these practices, is that we can spend time on the cushion. Well, what am I doing now? What am I doing now? Much better just to take up one and give yourself to that in a sitting period. And some advice on the eyes. Yeah, I prefer, and it's the Sambo Zen tradition, and Dogen taught eyes open, lowered gaze. Uh, it could be like a 45-degree angle, or some would have it even a little lower. If your eyes are that open, it's one of the sense gates, and there's just more sense of the space, but it's going to be a soft gaze, very diffuse. You're not actually staring at anything. That takes some practice if you're used to sitting with eyes closed. In some of the writings, I don't know that I've read this from a current teacher, but there's some of the masters would say, if your eyes are closed, you're just dreaming or lost in emptiness. That's interesting. What is it called? The Cave of Black Demons, or Black Demon Cave, just emptiness. And there is something about this, just eyes open. This everything coming and going, and nothing excluded. But if you're used to eyes closed, you might try experimenting with just letting in a little bit of light. So like you could just see your eyelashes. And then there's still a sense of this poise. And the whole room is sitting with you, is sitting you, is mooing. You can actually have the sense when you sit that everything is settling down. And this vivified quality, everything. And this, it's always changing, but transparent, kind of particulate quality. It's so lovely to have the eyes a little open, to just allow that to be part of the experience. So again, I would invite us to experiment with it. If you haven't read, speaking of reading, that essay of Dogen, Universal Recommendations on Zazen, Fukan Zazengi, it's widely available online. I just recently, maybe again, came across 6 translations of it, or maybe it's 5 renderings, just all side by side. And then on the far right, there was a column with an earlier essay that he's obviously drawn on in places. And it's just wonderful. And by reading those side by side different translations, it helps to see the multivalence of the language, and realize that we may not, of course, we don't know exactly what he's saying. And yet, even one paragraph at a time. And there is a paragraph there where Dogen, in great detail, just says how to sit and talks about what to do with the eyes. Okay. Thank you for your questions.